The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
All right, we have the four-time world champion and the Lord of Newcastle, Mark Richards, on the lineup today. MR, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
How are you doing today? Where are you today? Who are you with?
I'm sitting in the living room just at Merewether Beach, and I wish I could drag you down here and take you surfing with me and use that Lord of Newcastle line so I could get any wave I wanted, but it doesn't seem to work that way.
Yeah, it'd work out for both of us because I would get a proximity wave every now and then if that was the case. But did you surf today, or are you going to surf at some point?
I was going to surf this morning. I got up early and I'd planned to surf because surprisingly, with the contest a week away and most of the guys and girls in town, so far it hasn't actually been that crowded. I think when events are on, sometimes a lot of the recreational surfers tend to actually keep away. We've had a pretty crazy rain event over the last week where basically most of New South Wales, or the coastal areas of New South Wales from the Gold Coast right down to Sydney and the South Coast, are in a pretty major sort of flood situation. There's a lot of people who have lost their houses and there's been a lot of devastation. And unfortunately for the stretch of Newcastle beaches, that kind of rain event and the storm that came with it tends to have washed the banks away. So at the moment, we've got like a really nice swell. It's sort of 4 to 5 feet, and it's just, like a beautiful offshore wind, perfect conditions. But the banks are low tide banks only. At high tide, it's sort of barely breaking, and then it comes on for a few hours, sort of either side of the tide. So we kind of went from having a summer of great banks to a big, what we call a southerly buster, which is a strong southerly, which ruined the banks about a month ago. And they started to come back and they were looking like they were going to be really good for the event, but they just got nailed again. So I'm kind of hoping we get another big southerly in the next week or so before the event start to, sort of whip them into better shape.
Move some sand around. And this is the first time, I was looking this up, this is the first time a championship tour event has been held in Newcastle since 1990, so 30 years. What's the vibe been like in the community there with the CT coming to town?
Everyone is like really, really excited about it. And it's, I think there's a certain amount of disbelief that it's actually going to happen, that we will have the best male and female surfers in the world surfing on Newcastle beaches. And I think what people were mostly excited about was, possibly not so much the event, but the chance to actually see them prior to the event and during the event warming up and surfing other beaches in the Newcastle area. Because as you know, with a surfing competition, you sit there all day and you only get to see, some of the rounds or, the whole thing. Not every surfer surfs on the day, whereas if you, went to the beach the day before the event, most of them would be in the water warming up. So I think people are pretty excited about the fact that the best surfers in the world will be in Newcastle and surfing on all the city beaches sort of prior to the event and actually during the event. So Newcastle has definitely embraced the event. When the announcement was made, I think I was in total disbelief. I think I'm still in disbelief, and I'm actually really excited about it. It's great. All I'm hoping is that we do get really good surf. I know the organisation of the event will be great because Warren Smith, who runs the Surf Fest event in Newcastle, was involved, and Warren's like a full pro at putting events together. And obviously with all the WSL staff, the organisation is going to be, without question, all we really need is waves. And I think if we get 4 or 5 days of great waves, we've got a good chance of the event coming back again. And that's, I think, what we want to see. We don't want to just see it as a one-off, we're a COVID backstopped somewhere where we can have the event. We want the event to actually come back, and everyone to be really excited about it and want to come back again.
It's interesting you talking about the community excitement around having, the world's best male and female surfers there in the flesh, both to compete and then in free surfs, because we actually talk about on this podcast a lot how, in decades past, that was really one of the only, if not the only way young surfers could be exposed to world-class talent, was when the tour would come to town and you'd see them surf your home break. Now it's a little different with, the internet. You can kind of watch a Jordy Smith surf whenever you like, but it doesn't actually kind of take the place of being like, wow, this is the bank I surf every day, and that's Steph Gilmore surfing it.
Yeah. You're 100% right. Like with the past season in Hawaii, all those epic days that went down a pipeline, they were on YouTube and they were on internet. They were just everywhere. You could virtually watch every wave that was ridden, which is, amazing to be able to do that. But I think to be in the water with those surfers, or to be in a situation where you're on the beach watching them, you just can't compare that to, watching on YouTube or watching on the internet. And I was watching Merewether yesterday afternoon, and it was sort of 4 to 5 feet, and it was inconsistent, but there were some good waves. And I think where I was looking from was in the distance, and I saw Philippe Toledo get a few waves, and in between waves there was some good young Grom surfers in the water, and you could actually see them just gravitating towards him to talk to him. And he was obviously super friendly, he was talking to him, and like that experience for those kids, that's, you can't compare something like that to actually watching, Philippe surfing trestles or a spot in Brazil on the internet. It just doesn't compare. And one of our local photographers got a shot of Italo the other day coming out of the water, just surrounded by a team of kids, like high-fiving him. So that is an amazing opportunity for surf fans and young people to actually see, the best male and female surfers in the flesh, as opposed to seeing them, on the tube, kind of.
And like, Newcastle has always been really well represented on the elite stage. We're going to get to your magnificent career here in a minute, but even sort of recent current generations of Novocastrians on the CT, you've got your Ryan Callinans and your Morgan Sibiliches and Luke Egan's, your Matt Hoyes. And I'm wondering if you've given this any thought, and if so, what your theories are on what is it about Newcastle that produces such a strong surfing community? Is it consistency of waves? Is it something about the way the community members play off of each other and drive performance? But it just seems like it's always been so well represented.
That's a hard one to answer, Dave. I don't think I've got the answer to that question. In terms of surf, we obviously don't have the best surf in the world. That's a fact, but we do have consistent surf. We're in a unique situation where the city is on the coastline, and even if you live inland, like more than sort of 20 or 30 minutes from the beach, there's always been a very strong surfing culture in Newcastle. With most of the competitive surfers, they've come out of the Merewether Beach area and the Merewether Board Club. In terms of the tour, there was, myself, Luke Egan, Nicky Woods, Matt Hoy, Simon Law, and then on to, the young guys that you mentioned who are doing well on the tour now. I think the board club has played a big part in that, because the club has always been very supportive of their young surfers, and they've sort of gone out of their way to, encourage them and sort of help them competitively. So I mean, it's hard to say. It's just a combination of things. And so I think it's the consistency of surf, the fact that we live on the coast, the board club, and obviously it's over the last, 10 or 20 years, there's been a continuing lineage of young guys who have come through, and they've actually had the ability to win events and to qualify for the CT and be on the tour. And I think it sort of happens in different areas. A lot of great surfers have come out of the Gold Coast, like there was a Gold Coast bubble there before. I think, going back to when I was young, most of the best surfers in Australia were coming out of the Sydney area. In the last, few years, or the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen this emergence of all these great, Brazilian surfers come out of Brazil. So for whatever reason it is, I think that certain areas in a certain amount of time, produce good surfers. And I think that they're actually, a lot of it probably comes from the inspiration of a surfer from that area doing well, who proves that it doesn't really matter. You don't have to come from Hawaii to be a good competitive surfer or be a great surfer. You can come from the worst beach break on the planet. And, Kelly's probably the classic example of that. Kelly hasn't come from world-class surf in Florida. He's come from average sort of fun surf. So I guess it's, people that do well, I think, inspire other people to actually do well. And, you could say that has been the case with, Mick and Joel and the guys on the Gold Coast, and, Italo and Gabby and the crew in Brazil. And, there's a now push coming out of San Clemente, and that's, I guess, it's been inspired by Chloe Andino. So it's, yeah.
That's fair. I think to that end, one could logically state that your success on tour has sort of made everyone believe it's possible in town. I'm fortunate enough that I've got friends there, and I've been able to spend a bit of time there, and I'm always blown away by just the collective level of talent in the water, as ex-pros like Trav Lynch, or just sort of civilians like Ben Frawley. But it's like carpenters and computer programmers, everyone is surfing at like a really high performance level that I don't experience in other places. You'll kind of get a class of young surfers or sort of professional surfers or surf industry folks that surf really well. And then the broader communities, there's a delta between their ability and the broader communities. But in Newcastle, it just seems so high. My head's just constantly turning to be like, who's that guy? And they're like, oh, it's the mailman. Who's that guy? Oh, that's a university teacher. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like, what's going on down there?
I think that's the case. There are a lot of really, really great surfers in Newcastle who aren't competitive surfers. And as you mentioned, they're just tradies and guys that work 9 to 5. But, when they put on a pair of board shorts or a wetsuit and head in the water, they totally rip. But I think if you dig deep, I think you would find that all over the world now. If you went to any beach in Florida or any beach in California, I was just away for a few days on the North Coast surfing, and there were people just tearing everywhere, guys and girls, and not competitive surfers, just recreational surfers. So yeah. I think the level is really high everywhere now, and I guess that probably board design has been one of the reasons that everyone is surfing so well. It's like the high performance surfboards just go so well, and there's now so many alternatives where you can find a board regardless of your ability, your body size, your body weight. Right. You can walk into nearly any surf shop on the planet and find a surfboard that you can actually match to your ability, and a board that you can actually improve on.
I'm glad you mentioned surfboards, because unless I'm mistaken, I believe that is how you got your start in surfing, because your dad, Ray, was one of the first people to have a surfboard business in the area. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. He was one of the first people to actually surf in Newcastle.
So what was it like growing up in your family when with your dad, who obviously had a passion for surfing, but probably got you into it before you even had a choice?
My fallback line on this is I was born into a family that surfs, so I pretty much had no choice. I was going surfing regardless. All our weekends we went to Blacksmiths, which was one of the beaches south of Newcastle, and that was a really popular beach because there were no rocks and there were no leg ropes in those days. So if you fell off, your board didn't go on the rocks. A lot of beaches in the Newcastle town area, Nobby's, the Cowie Hole, Newcastle Bar Beach and Merewether have rocks. So there weren't a huge amount of people surfing them, and there basically weren't a huge amount of people surfing in those days at all. And I think the reason my dad started surfing was he saw a guy surfing one day at Bar Beach and asked the guy where he got the board from, and he'd bought it either from Gordon Woods or Barry Bennett in Sydney. So he went down, bought one, brought it home, started surfing himself, and then he got people asking him, what is that? Where do you get them? That looks like fun. I'd like to try that. And that actually gave him the idea to buy some boards from Barry and Gordon and start a surf shop in Newcastle. So that's basically how it started, how my involvement in surfboard started. And we lived, originally the shop was in town in Hunter Street, which is the main part of town. And we lived on in a small flat, like apartment on top of the shop. So, and then there was a series of all these old houses down the back in the laneway, and that sort of became, I turned one of them into my shaping room. So I was pretty much, from a very young age, I was immersed in, I don't know, in surfboard, surf culture, surfboard manufacturing.
Do you ever think about what path your life would have taken if it wasn't for surfing? Do you think of where you would have ended up career-wise?
I think I would have had a business. It would have been MR's packing, because I am insane at packing stuff into cars and like packing. When I pack my suitcase to go away, everything is so logically put in a certain spot. The lid fits. Like, I'm so good at it. It's like every time when I'm driving on the highway, this is like nuts. I'm driving, like I see a car go by, like a station wagon or an SUV, and there's just shit everywhere in the back piled up. And I'm just going, wow, those guys needed me. I could have packed that car away.
Pull over. I've got a few tips. I've seen the back of your car. I can attest to this. It's immaculate. And I appreciate the spatial talents. I'm sure it actually served you really well. So when you were coming up in surfing, immersed in surfing, as you put it, this would have been what, 60s probably?
Early 60s? Yeah.
Early 60s?
Yeah, maybe late 60s. So I was born in 57, so would have been late 60s.
I'm always curious, and it changes obviously generation to generation because the environment was different. But in the 60s and 70s, was there a definitive moment for you where you thought, well, I'm pretty good at this. I am relatively really good at this compared to other people. This could be a career? Or was it more of a gradual kind of like, I'm pretty good and I'll see where it takes me?
Dave, this could be a whole podcast time answer.
That's fine. We can do a multi-part series. Go as deep as you want.
I'll try and condense it, because one of my issues is just to babble on and not be very precise. But
no issue on this podcast. You go for it.
When I started surfing, there was no such thing as pro surfing. Like, I was born in 1957. The first events I went in were either Merewether Board Club cadet events or the Newcastle cadet titles, which there was an under 14. It was like a schoolboy competition. And I surfed in the under 14 division with Peter McCabe and Cole Smith, who were two great Newcastle surfers. And we used to win these trophies that were trophy shops basically sold them. And, it was like this ugly thing with a barometer or a thermometer in it, and they just screwed the sportsman on top. It was either like a footy player or a surfer or a tennis player, like generic type trophies. And the first one of those I won, I was like so stoked about it. And I just went, this is so cool. You go in these contests and you win the trophy and you stick it on the mantelpiece at home. So the Newcastle under 14 schoolboys progressed to the state. There was no such thing as an Australian schoolboys in those days. And then I was surfing in, junior events, and I was surfing in senior amateur events while still a junior. And there was a lot of travelling around in Australia involved for it. And the most you could hope to win. But I absolutely loved putting on a singlet and competing and winning trophies. I thought it was like the best thing of all time to actually win a trophy. And then in the early 70s, where I'd won an Australian junior title, I think in 72, I got second to Terry Fitzgerald in the Australian Open titles while still a junior. And all of a sudden, pro surfing not started, but we started, I think there was an event somewhere which actually had some prize money. So there was this kind of transition where I'd nearly gone as far as I could winning trophies. And all of a sudden, there were some events around with a few hundred, or maybe $1,000 or $2,000 for first. So we kind of went from going, cool, I won a trophy, to, wow, I just won $500. How good is this? It's even better than the trophy. And then the events started to progress. And then in 1976, Peter Townend and Fred Hemmings, that was the first year of, pro surfing, international professional surfing. Fred was running the events in Hawaii, and I think in conjunction with, I think it was Graham Cassidy at the time running the events in Australia, and Bill Bowman, who ran the Stubbies event, in conjunction with Peter Beness in South Africa. They sort of cobbled together a tour. And I think, a lot of it was actually Peter's idea. And there's that great story when Peter won the world title in 76, there was no trophy, and Fred pulled a trophy out of the Outrigger Canoe Club in Hawaii, which was a trophy for paddling, and just went, here, PT, you're the world champ. So, so for me, there was no choice which young surfers have today, which is, am I good enough to do this? Do I want to take the risk? Do I, not pursue a career as a carpenter or a school teacher or something? Do I throw everything at it? Whereas for me, it just seemed like the logical thing to do. And also it was something to do as well as the chosen career path was I wanted to be a surfboard shaper. And that was the direction I was going in life. It was nearly as though the whole competitive thing was like a deviation or an aside to the tunnel vision on I want to be a surfboard shaper and I want to be a surfboard manufacturer. That's where my future actually lies.
I'm always fascinated by what it was like in what I would call kind of the prehistory era of international competitive surfing, right? Because as you describe it, there's sort of schoolboy competitions and there's Australian national titles, but there's no like global tour at this point. There's no kind of like benchmark for people to be like, yeah, we do this to get to that. It was all very kind of regional at that point. And I just think it's really, really interesting. I even read, I think you mentioned the 72 Aussie national titles. And what I read was that you, who are undeniably associated with the glory of the twin fin, finished runner-up to Simon Anderson, who was the inventor of the thruster. And I thought, oh, well, what a potent board design final that ended up being in hindsight. Like what a great thing.
It's I'm not really sure what to say there, Dave. It just there was basically no tour, and then there was a tour which cobbled together. And I think the success of the early days of the tour from 76 onwards and the events pre that came from the vision and the dedication of the contest directors at the time. And of the obvious ones were Graham Cassidy, Bill Bowman in Australia, and also Brian Singer and Doug Warbrick with the Rip Curl event and their commitment to bells over all those years. And then there was Peter Beness in South Africa, and then Fred Hemmings and Randy Rarick in Hawaii. They were the guys that really had a belief that pro surfing could go somewhere. And I think they had a vision. I didn't share the same vision, and I wasn't as positive as those guys. And I know that looking back in time, Sean Thompson, Ian Cairns, Peter Townend, Mark Warren, they could see the vision. They just went, this is going to happen one day. We're going to be part of this. It may not happen in our lifetimes where you can actually call yourself a pro surfer and make a living, but we think it will happen at one point. And I used to think, wow, that'd be insane. But, guys just need a second career path, because once you get to a point competitively where you're not winning anymore, you get thrown off the tour bus very, very quickly. And the thing to remember back then during the late 70s and the early 80s, there was nowhere near the sponsorship money that was available today. And there was nowhere near the amount of prize money. It was, most of the first prizes in events that I won was sort of $2,000 and $3,000, which, barely paid to go to the next sort of few events. So it was, it was kind of pretty hard going during those early days, and a lot of competitive surfers, did it fairly tough trying to make it sort of happen. But there was a lot of belief in one day we would actually get there, and that, people would appreciate. Like there's that wonderful story that Rabbit tells, and I think it was in 72 where he wanted to actually go to Hawaii to surf in Hawaii, and he didn't have the money, and he needed $2,000 to cover the airfare, accommodation, and everything he needed when he was there. and he got an appointment with a bank manager. And the story is it was the Commonwealth Bank in Coolangatta. And in those days, you could actually get to the bank manager. Brad got an appointment, and apparently he filled in on his application form for the loan that, he was a pro surfer. And basically the manager threw him out of the bank and said, "Son, there's no such thing as a pro surfer."
It's interesting how your approach at that time was, I'm going to be a competitive surfer en route to being a board builder. Like that was sort of the career goal, which makes a lot of sense. And I think at the time, surfers, especially high-level surfers, were a lot more involved in either building their own boards or working very closely with their shapers. And that's something that's changed a lot over time. Jordy Smith was on the podcast last week, and we were both laughing about the fact that he's probably one of the only surfers on tour that would even think about shaping his own boards. And he's shaped some boards for the Australian leg. But you obviously got immersed into board building through your father. Were there other shapers who you ended up studying with throughout your early career in terms of being able to sharpen that part of your skill set?
There were a lot of people that really helped me, Dave. Like initially it was Jeff McCoy, who's, one of the most well-known, Australian board manufacturers and known all over the world. I rode Jeff's boards when I was young. I think it was, 12, 13, 14, maybe 15, 16. I can't remember exactly the ages, but I used to spend all my school holidays with Jeff in Sydney, and Jeff's factory was in Brookvale, and we used to surf Narrabeen every day. And that was where I first got to surf with Cole Smith, Grant Dapper Oliver, Mark Warren. It was where I first saw Simon actually surf. So we would surf in the morning, in the afternoon, and throughout the day, I basically would just hang in the factory and I'd watch, I watched Jeff Shape. I watched Bruce Shannon from Surfing World magazine. Bruce was the glasser at the time. Mark Warren was actually glossing and polishing at McCoy. Tony Wicker-Hardwick was, I think, sanding. And I pretty much, from the time I spent hanging in the factory over 3 or 4 years, for a month every year, 2 groups of school holidays, I learned how to make a surfboard from start to finish, so I could sort of do everything. And that was actually, inspired me to want to be in the surfboard industry, because it seemed as though whenever there was surf, if someone came in and said Narrabeen was pumping, all of a sudden, the tools would be dropped, the door would be closed, and everyone would be just totally out of there, straight to the beach for a couple of hours, and then they would come back and stay late at that night to actually make up for it. And I thought this seemed like the idyllic lifestyle, to be working and building surfboards, something that you're passionate about, and then to be able to go surfing whenever you liked seemed like a dream came true. So initially it was Jeff. The next person that had a huge influence was Dick Brewer. After the Hawaiian season in 77, I stayed on and spent 2 weeks shaping with him. That was when he had his shaping room in Chun's Reef. And at that point, Dick had made me some boards, which worked insane. And the problem I had with it as a shaper and back then was that I had images in my head of what I wanted to create, and I could use all the tools. I knew how to use planer and sanding blocks and surf forms and everything. But my process, A to B, of shaping a raw blank, I didn't have the skill to replicate the image that I had in my mind. When you shape a board from scratch, you've got an image of how you want it to finish. And I could never get it. But after spending 2 weeks with Dick, that image, all of a sudden, it was like my hands and my mind, everything came together and I could actually do it. So he was the guy that, I guess put all the pieces together for me. Like I had I had the skills and the ideas, but I couldn't make them all come together. So Brewer was really he was the greatest input for me. And without him, I don't think I would have had the competitive success or won the world titles or a lot of it, because really the inspiration for the twin fin also came from Dick, and that came from me telling him a story about my size and weight, 6 foot tall, 185 kgs. I was riding single fins in the events. They were 6'8" long. Most of the events in those days were held in small surf, so I was finding, I was basically bogging down. I was too heavy. The board was too narrow. And the year prior to working with Dick, Reno Abalira in the 2SM Coca-Cola Surf Contest in Sydney had come with a little round-nosed twin fin fish that I guess it looked like one of the Steve List San Diego fishes. And that event was held over a series of rounds. And Reno rode that board on 2-foot days and was just going 100 miles an hour. And I just went, that's it. I got to get one of those for when it's small. And he gave me some suggestions for dimensions, and I made one and called it the Bumblebee and sprayed a bee on the bottom. And I used to ride it in Newcastle on little days, and it went great, but I didn't have the confidence to take it on the tour with me or to ride it when it was bigger, because it started, drifting and getting a bit loose when it was bigger. And I told, Dick that whole story about the two boards, and he just kind of went, that's so easy. Just go home and design a board between the two. Take the best aspects of the single fin and the best aspects of the twin fin and try and find the happy medium between the two boards. And that was where, the board that's known as the Free Ride 20 came from. And that was the board I won bells on in 1978. And that, started the second twin fin revolution. And that board really was the board that was the catalyst for my competitive success from there on. And, the idea and everything that actually, got me those world titles, it all came from that board initially. And if I hadn't have, I'm pretty sure if I hadn't spent that time with Dick, and if I hadn't run that story by him, maybe that idea, idea would have come at some point. But the idea may never have come. And my whole, shaping twin fin competitive world title history could be completely different. And then just continuing on, there were all these other people that kind of helped me as well, like Reno Abalira let me shape, Ben Iper taught me stuff. I got to watch Tom Parrish shape, Jerry Lopez, in the last few years, like I've had a close association with Matt Biolis, Pat Rawson was also incredibly giving with helping me. So I guess I've been really lucky because I'm not like a huge surfboard manufacturer in the surfboard industry. I'm like a little guy, I pretty much don't even exist. That no one has ever considered me a threat. So everyone has been really kind of open with me. And if I've, gone to someone and said, hey, I need some help with this, or what do you think about that? People have always been, tremendously giving. And there's been, over the years, a lot of people that have just really helped me. And, I'm incredibly grateful for that.
It's amazing. I'm just kind of working the timelines out in my head when you're working with, Dick Brewer, you're pursuing a competitive surfing career in service of a board building career. As you highlighted, the tour starts to form, retrospectively or retroactively in 76 with PT winning the title. Sean Thompson wins the title in 77. Bugs wins in 78. And that's right kind of on the tail end of what you've just outlined, kind of figuring out this performance twin or this shape that works kind of between these two shapes. And then past that, you became surfing's first competitive dynasty. You won in 79, 80, 81, 82, or 81, 82, excuse me. That's unbelievable. Like, so I guess my question is, did you feel like you had that in you before the Dick Brewer experience, or was that a revelation after that and you thought, this has taken my surfing up several levels. I'm going to win events and world titles now?
The twin gave me a tremendous competitive advantage. Most people were surfing single fins at the time, like during 78, 79. People were very reluctant to jump on them. It was a little bit like the thruster in 82. It took Simon to win bells and then the Coke to, basically give the thruster the stamp of approval. As soon as you win a contest on it, everyone wants one. So So I was lucky that no one jumped on it quickly. So I feel for a year or two I had this secret weapon competitive advantage. And then weirdly, this is going to sound really weird, but I had no driving ambition during the late 70s, the way PT did, the way, Sean Thompson, 77, Rabbit in 78, the way they, wanted to win the title and actually won the title. In 79, the first year I won, I didn't set out to win the world title, and I hadn't set out in any of those previous years to win it. My plan at the beginning of the year was to surf in 3 countries, and that was Australia, Japan and Hawaii, and then the times in between, surfboard shaping career. It was so competitive surfing was just something to do. I'll have a little holiday and go and surf in a contest. And then in 79, I can't remember exactly, but I think I won 2 of the first Aussie events, and then there were 4 events in Japan straight afterwards, and I think I won 2. There'll be a statistician out there who will dispute that, and I'm probably wrong, but it was something like that. I got off to this insane start, and I was a long way ahead. And I've, some things you never forget, even though it's, 40 years ago or something. Ian Cairns and Peter Townend bailed me up after the last Japanese event, and they said, all you've got to do is show up for the rest of the tour and you'll win. You don't have to win any more events. Show up, make a couple of semis, make a few quarters. It's just you pretty much can't be beaten unless you start getting knocked out in every round. And I went, wow, that's great, but, see you guys in Hawaii or see you somewhere else. I'm going home to shape for the next 6 months. And going into the Hawaiian season that year, I was in 4th, and I think I made the final in the Pipe Masters. I can't remember, but I didn't improve my position. Last event, World Cup at Haleiwa, I had to win. Rabbit had to be world champ, had to be knocked out in the first round, which Ken Bradshaw got either a wild card or an alternate or something that year. Ken knocked him out first round. Dane had to lose. Dane Kiloha was next to go. Dane had to lose in the quarters. He was knocked out by Edwin Santos, who I think from Puerto Rico, who came through the trials, and no one thought that was going to happen. Then PT had to beat Shane in the semis, which everyone was going, that's not going to happen. And it happened. And then in the final, I had to beat PT to win. And going into that last event, the thought of winning the world title was just so, it was on another planet. So this isn't going to happen. All these things cannot happen. And it sort of did. And I won that first one. And one of the things that I've never forgotten with that was prior to paddling out, PT, I think it was as we were getting the singlets on, PT wandered over to me and he said, I really want you to win because I want you to win the world title, but I am going to try as hard as, insert the word, to stop you, and I'll be doing everything to stop you. Be ready. It's going to be heavy. So winning that first one, I was pretty stoked. I was seriously stoked. It felt insane, and it was, it felt like such a great achievement. And I sort of got the idea. I thought, well, no one's ever won this twice in a row. People have tried, but no one has won twice in a row. So I thought, I'm actually going to have a dig and try and win in 1980 and be the first one to win a second world title. And the second year, I didn't do the whole tour. I got a really good start. I think I missed one part of the tour. I can't remember what it was, but I missed some. And I won with, a pretty serious point spread, basically. No other way to say it. I was a long way ahead at the end. The third and fourth ones were a continuation of that. I just went, well, I've won 2 in a row. No one's ever won 3. I'll try and win 3. And then I thought, no one's ever won 4 in a row. I'll try and win 4. But by the third and fourth ones, they were, obviously monumental competitive battles with everyone. But with Shane Aren, it was, they were gnarly seesawing backward and forward results all year where, Shane pushed me all the way to the edge during those as well as the other guys. But, Shane was the guy where it was just, half to 2/3 of the way through the year, it was looking like it's either MR or Shane, who can keep ahead of each other. So after winning 4, I kind of went, well, mission accomplished. And I was having a lot of trouble with my back at the time. And I was thinking, I've spent the last 3 years, drifting away from what I really wanted to do. And I thought, now's the time to go back to doing what I wanted to do was be a surfboard manufacturer. And I was thinking about the future because, again, there was still no, you never have to work again at that point in pro surf.
Yeah.
You had to, the moment you stepped off the bus in the early 80s, it was like, shit, I got to find a job. So that was sort of it. So I was, I guess, one of the very, very fortunate things about me competitively, I never ever suffered the disappointment of setting out to win the world title and not winning, or being in a position where, geez, I'm so close, it's down to the last event. If I can beat, X and Y in the next event, I'm the world champ, and then you don't beat X and Y and you actually lose. And I thankfully never had to deal with that because it didn't happen. And I actually think about it a lot. It's weird, as you get older, you think about stuff, stuff that I wouldn't have thought of. Like when I was competing, I would have paddled over the top of my mum and drowned her in the process to win a heat and not thought twice about it. Now I think, holy shit, what was going on in my head to actually think like that? And, I just really wanted to ruin people's dreams, hopes and aspirations, and just beat them bad. So that's where my head was at. And honestly, now I think about that, and as I just said before, I kind of think, holy shit, wow, what was going on?
I'm so glad you brought that up though, right? Because that's such an amazing dichotomy with you, because I've known you for a bunch of years, and that's not just my opinion, this is the consensus, is you're such a wonderfully polite, nice, mild-mannered human being on land, but then any of the testimonies from your competitors at the time are like, man, he was really ruthless and cutthroat and aggressive in the water. And I'm curious as to whether or not you were aware of sort of this Jekyll and Hyde thing at the time, and what you thought of it.
I guess I became more aware of it as I got, obviously I'm very aware of it now. But what used to happen was the moment I walked into the competitors area, Dave, and I put that coloured singlet on, something happened to me. It was like I became possessed by that singlet and wanting to win at all costs. Like that Billabong event in 1985 at Waimea, that there were some closeout sets that day, and I had a surf, prior to the event. There were no closeout sets prior to the event, but I think as I was setting up, there was a closeout event. And, I'd be lying if I was saying I wasn't, scared or concerned that day. The surf was it was really big and really dangerous. And there was no jet ski rescue in those days at Waimea. You were pretty much on your own if things went to shit. And, I put that singlet on, and when I paddled out for that first heat, I actually wanted a closeout set to come because I wanted to take off on a closeout at Waimea. It was just, psycho shit used to happen to me when I put a contest singlet on, and I just wanted to win so bad and, do anything I kind of could to win. And all of a sudden, I'd take the singlet off and it was like, whoa, back to normal again. So, I don't know what it is. I just had this really deep, burning desire to kind of win. And, this is going to sound like really messed up, but I still beat myself up occasionally over heats I lost for making just stupid mistakes. Some that are just, I'll just never forget the things I did wrong. Like I'll think about them, weirdly. And I know that probably sounds really weird for something that happened 20 or 30 years ago. But sometimes when I'm, shaping or surfing, it's, I just go, my head goes somewhere, and I start thinking, shit, if I'd just done that in that heat, I would have won that. I don't know. It's crazy. Like, so Dave, sometimes my head is like a pinball machine. It's like it's going in so many different directions. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, we're going to get to a few more topics, and we've got some listener questions for you. But first, we're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. So MR, you mentioned the way you described your first world title. It was almost involuntary or reluctant to a degree, right? You're like, well, I'm going to do a few events and I'm really board building. And then it does feel like there was a mental shift for you after you won the first one, if only in, hey, here's a goal because I want to go back to back. But over the course of your 4 years of world titles, did you feel like there was more importance around the tour, I guess, towards the third and fourth one? Did you feel like there was more intensity or attention, or that it was kind of building in momentum through those years, or was it more of the same?
No, I think it was. I'm not sure about intensity. I know I think as time went on, there were more and more events coming onto the tour, and I think there was obviously more media attention, and there were more spectators as time went on. I think the events actually got better, the organisation and the structure of the events and the way they were running them. I think it was just, it was a gradual improvement over the years. There wasn't like a day where we kind of went, wow, that last event wasn't, run very well, but wow, all of a sudden everything is run perfect now. It was like a learning process, and it was developing, I'm sure it's exactly the same as what's going on with the WSL now. And, maybe just to, think back in time a year before pre-COVID, it was like, you guys weren't happy to sit on your bum and just go, this is it. It's never going to get any better. We're just going to do it exactly the same forever. I'm sure that, the brains trust at headquarters and everyone involved was going, hey, let's, we can try this, or what can we do to make it better? It's just, I think it's human nature and it's life. You're never, ever completely satisfied. You're always trying to, improve things. And yeah.
As we mentioned, you were professional surfing's really first champion dynasty and long-standing, really, when you think about it. As it was happening in the moment, were you aware of the importance and the impact at the time, or is it something you think differently about through hindsight? And I guess part of what I'm getting at here is obviously the sport was so new that there was probably a version of it being pretty Wild West, but you were really the sport's first long-standing mainstream star in a lot of ways.
I guess I'm not sure what to say.
Just agree with me, Mark. Come on. No, but I guess did you feel like you were famous? Is probably a fair question.
In a weird sort of way, Dave, but it wasn't something I set out to do. Like I didn't compete to be famous. I didn't, when I first started surfing in schoolboy contests, I didn't compete because I thought having a few trophies on the mantelpiece would make me famous, or I didn't compete in pro events because I didn't think if I can win a few of these, I can be famous. I want to be famous. That was never the motivation. The motivation was just to be, to win contests, to be the best competitive surfer I could be. And the motivation for shaping was just to be as good as to continue progressing and be as good as I can. My dad used to say to me, you're only as good as your last contest, so it meant if you got knocked out in your last contest, you were like, the worst surfer on tour. It's like, don't get carried away because you win a contest. And, in the scheme of life, winning a few contests, isn't, or winning a world title, it's personal glory, but you're not changing the world or anything. You're not curing cancer, but you're not a doctor saving people's lives. It's it's a very kind of, it's great, but it's a personal thing. It's a very small thing when you compare to everything else that's going on in the world. And the level of fame that a surfer achieves, if there's such a thing as a nice dose of fame, where you get the opportunity to to go places and do things that you may not have been able to do because of that little bit of fame you got from surfing. It's a nice dose. It's not like you are, like a famous movie star or a famous musician that possibly needs bodyguards to go somewhere, or if they want to go and get a hamburger, they can't go to the local store because they need an entourage to go with them. So I think that's probably if fame is a good thing, and that's questionable, then being especially in surfing, being a champion surfer, male or female, you get a really nice little dose of it where it provides all these wonderful opportunities for experiences that you may not have got, but you can live your life sort of very normally. And for me, I come from Newcastle's like a working class town. I think people were very supportive. I think they were happy for my success. I know the board club used to, run a function for me, like a party thing to congratulate me when I got home. But, then it was just totally back to normal. The next day in the water, it was like, seriously, there's no way we're giving you the next wave, just contest, wait your turn. It was I was always, I think, coming from Newcastle, any time that the head may have started to expand, there was someone to, pull me back in the line.
I love that perspective because I have thought about this often where I think kind of surfing superstars like the best version of them actually provide an interesting model for celebrity in that they're still, as you said, they're successful, they're compensated, they're afforded these very, very cool experiences, but they're still accessible, like I could paddle out with Kelly Slater before the contest if I wanted, at most places. But I guess in a way it's a nice way of retaining humanity in a way, right? Because you do interact with everybody and you do interact with the public in a way that you can look at maybe other sports superstars or entertainment stars who are isolated and cut off. And as you said, they can't even go get a burger without a security team, which sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, totally. Even, I guess Kelly, it's undoubtedly he's attained a level of fame, far beyond any other world champion in our history. But from what I can gather, he still has a pretty normal life. He can do whatever he wants to do. And as you said before, that's a very unique thing. If you'd been in Hawaii over the last sort of 3 or 4 months and you wanted to, you could have gone surfing with the guy every day, not technically gone with him, but you could have paddled out at every surf spot and said hi and sat beside the guy and, just, had a 2-minute conversation about the surf. And that's a very unique thing to be able to do with, someone like, the GOAT. And as I mentioned before, with Italo walking out of the water at Merewether, no security detail and, surrounded by 10 kids all just frothing, high-fiving him. It's unique. As I said, if there's such a thing as fame, then the little bit you get with surfing is pretty cool.
We've talked about before too, and you're such a inspired and inspirationally humble kind of guy. Were there any points when you were younger where you not so much dipped into fame, but went, oh, look, I've earned this, I'm going to spend a little money on myself? Were there any big purchases for young MR early on in your competitive career?
The only purchase was in 1979. After I got back from South Africa, I bought a used Porsche, and I just used to love driving fast. And, I used to, there was a John Newell Porsche Centre in Sydney, and it was a 911. On the way to the airport and from the airport, you used to turn that corner, and that showroom was there, and I used to just drool as I went by this company. They go 100 miles an hour. And the manager there, Dale Goodman, actually took me for a drive. I stopped one time and, I was wandering around just going, wow, these things are insane. He said, do you want me to take you for a drive in one? And I went, oh, that'd be insane. And there was a long straight from where they were on this corner towards the airport. and it was early in the morning. There was no traffic, and he just like floored it down this street, pinned me back in the passenger seat, and I'm just going, I got to buy this. So that was my one indulgence. You know, I for quite a few years I had a used Porsche, but from there I either upgraded or to a Toyota Hi-Ace commercial van, and these days I drive a Toyota Kluger 4-wheel drive. So my little fascination with fast or exotic cars only lasted a few years, but it was fun while it lasted.
I love that story. You mentioned Kelly being in Hawaii before, and I'm going to use that as an opening to. I have a question about your early days in Hawaii, because I was first employed by Rabbit when I started at the ASP. This would have been 05, 06. And I've heard his version of the Bustin Down The Door seasons in Hawaii, where Bugs and Kanga, Sean, Mark Warren, yourself, and a few others really redefined high-performance surfing on the North Shore. And the brashness of the general approach and the self-marketing of it for some, present company not included, created a lot of tension with the local Hawaiian community. And for those who haven't seen Bustin' Down the Doors, you should. It's amazing. But there were threats of violence, and there was actual violence and threats of more. And as the story goes, Rabbit was hauled in front of a community council with his surfing future in Hawaii hanging in the balance. And you were hauled in front of them too, again, as the story goes. But you were brought there by the Hawaiians as a comparative example of how to respect communities and rip at the same time. So now that I have you here with a microphone, I want to hear your version of this story.
It's everything you said is 100% correct. It was a very scary time. If you were a young Aussie or South African on the North Shore, there was a lot of people that were very unhappy with Australian and South African surfers. And I don't know, Dave, I don't want to dive back into the whole thing, but I think the problem was there was a feeling of disrespect from the Hawaiian surfers. I feel that they, and I may be wrong, but this is just how I saw it, that they had been very accommodating and giving, and they shared their events with us, they shared their waves with us. They were initially stoked to see us all surfing in Hawaii and competing in Hawaii. They weren't as stoked with us when we started winning their events, because they were unquestionably, incredible surfers and the best watermen in the world at that point. And I think they were a little bit in shock that, these guys had come from Australia and Hawaii and sort of won events. But what went down badly with them was the fact that there were some articles written when the Aussie and South African surfers went home in newspapers and magazines, basically claiming, people thumping their chests going, we're great, we beat the Hawaiians in their home waters, we're the best. And some of the Hawaiians saw that as a disrespect to their culture and basically, sort of took exception to it. So that's really what it sort of came from. And I can, understand the way they were thinking. I understand that the Aussies and South African kids were just so excited because, going to Hawaii is it's a dream. It was a dream for us in those days to actually go there, to ride those waves and then to do well in the events. And to get into those events in the early days, there was, in the beginning, there was no such thing as pro surfing. There was no rating system in the early 70s. To get into events, you had to go there and basically get noticed and get voted into the events by a lot of the Hawaiian surfers. So you pretty much had to go there and just commit to any, hugely crazy, massive day and just throw yourself over the ledge so that they knew if they voted for you to get into an event that you wouldn't sit on the shoulder and not have a dig. And, there was one morning I pulled up a pipeline, and it was Second Reef Pipeline early in the morning. It's kind of closing out, and Rabbit was out there just getting flogged, and I'm just going, oh no, I wish he wasn't out there. That means I've got to go out there too. That was the mentality. And we were we were pushing each other to do crazier and crazier stuff and sort of show no fear. So the meeting you mentioned was called by, I think, Eddie Aikau realised that the situation had become not great and there were threats of violence, and Eddie felt that the only way to put an end to it was to actually have a meeting between the Hawaiian surfers and the Aussies and the South Africans. So he called a meeting at the Kuilima, and it was in one of the small conference rooms, and I pretty much, slinked in the back door, sat down the back. It was like, oh shit, I hope no one notices me here. It was like I just tried to melt into the chair. And really, like Rabbit and Ian were in the most trouble. And it was kind of like a courtroom scene. They were pretty much in the dock under cross-examination going, guys, this is what we think you've done. How do you sort of plead? So, Eddie was basically, with trying to just bring the whole thing to an end. And I basically, he spotted me and, asked me to come up, and I'm just going, oh no, I'm in trouble now too. It's like, and he, sat me down out the front, and that was when he, told that story you mentioned before about, that there's a way to act in Hawaii and there's a way not to act. And, certain people had acted the wrong way and I'd actually acted the right way, been respectful, hadn't sort of boasted. But I think a lot of that in my case, came from my sort of upbringing in Newcastle and the fact that I was, in a way, I feel like I had a kind of close connection with the local surfers and with the Hawaiians because I was travelling on my own. I was staying with Jock Sullivan's mum in Laniakea. Reno Abalira had organised that for me. I actually, one of my fondest memories of Hawaii, and one of the things I cherish most about it was, it's not so much winning contests as to be able to say that I think, I could count Eddie Aikau as a good friend. I spent a lot of time with him in those first couple of years. I think 73 or 74, I was there on my own and I was kind of lonely. I was staying in a self-contained part of Mrs. Sutherland's house, and I didn't really have, a lot of friends like Ian and PT and Rab and those guys. They were from different areas. I knew them, but I didn't know them well enough just to go and knock on the door and go and sit on their floor and hang out while they were watching TV. And I actually got really friendly with Eddie, and, I'd surf all morning, surf all over, and every lunchtime, make myself a Vegemite sandwich and drive down to Waimea and sit with him in the, next to the lifeguard tower, and he'd just tell me these crazy stories about big Waimea days, and rescuing tourists in the, in the shore break and stuff. So it's one of the, things I kind of hold dear about the Hawaiian experience is the time that I actually spent with him, and, what an incredible waterman and human and surfer he was, and, how lucky I was to, I considered him a friend. I don't know how he thought of me, but I considered him a friend. So, yeah.
I mean, even the story that you relay about him calling that meeting, and as I said, it's a story I've heard a bunch. It just sounds so radical, compared to today's climate that's very, very polarized, and I'm sure there were like strong emotions on both sides of the conversation at the time, but just the idea of someone like him going like, look, this is not good for anyone in the community or people visiting or surfing in general. I'm going to bring everyone here and we're going to have a conversation, try to work it out. Like, it just seems like such a radical yet effective way to go about it, especially looking through hindsight.
Yeah, he basically thought the only way to end it was to bring everyone together, air your grievances, shake hands and stand down. It's over, It's like, this is it. We've, the line's been drawn in the sand. There'll be no more threats. There'll be, everyone has to calm down. You guys need to behave. Here's how it's going to be. from here on in. So it was sort of like, it was like the president or the prime minister of the North Shore was laying down the law and going, listen, you guys, here's the deal. Take heed. I've spoken.
In a way that was good for the whole community too. It's like, and that's what feels so foreign, right? Is like, it doesn't sound like Eddie was personally benefiting from anything there. Like he was just saying, look, this is essential for the community to move forward.
No, there was no gain for him because he, he just made me 100% clear. There was no violence at all coming from Eddie Aikau, not at all. Eddie was just, as I said, he was like, a god. He was like the president of the North Shore. I remember the first time I met him, I was nearly quivering, putting out the hand to shake hand, putting out the hand to shake hands with him. I was like, oh my God, that's Eddie Aikau. I'm going to get to meet him and see him surf in the water. So, he was, as I said, he was like the prime minister, the president, I don't know, the king or the queen or whatever you want to call him. He was, what he said on the North Shore went. And if, when Eddie said it's time to, stand down, shake hands, go, everyone's had a beef, we're all, was basically like, get over it, kids, move on.
You mentioned retiring at the end of the 82 season because of back issues and also because you never had a season where you wanted to win the world title and you couldn't. What was life after the tour like for you? Did you pour yourself into board building? Did you take over your dad's surf shop? What was the post world title career for Mark Richards like in the 80s?
It was basically the same as the four world title year runs. I went back to what I liked doing, what I wanted to do with a chosen career path, which was surfboard shaping and just competing, occasionally. I competed in some Japanese events, some Aussie events, and obviously I wanted to keep going to Hawaii and competing in the Hawaiian events. My competitive success from there on inwards was very sporadic. I think it was probably worse than it was good. Because I just, I wasn't 100% there. I'd feel like mission accomplished. It was like I was going to events on tour because I thought I had to go and I thought maybe I wanted to go. And then I was getting there and going, do I really want to be here? Do I want to do this? Do I want to be at home? I was questioning what I was actually doing. And as soon as competitively you start questioning why you're there or what are you doing, is obviously when you start to not go as well. So I think it was, I can't remember the years, it was either 85 or 86 or 86 or 87. When I won those two Billabong events in Hawaii in a row, the year after, I figured that was the perfect time to pull the pin because I'd won in, the country on the tour that I loved competing in the most and that I loved being in the most, which was Hawaii. Like the 3 to 4 months that I spent in Hawaii every year was the highlight of every year. And I've had a lot of highlights in my life. And it's, that time in Hawaii or those times in Hawaii where they're up there with the highlights I've had in my life. So, I probably made a mistake to continue competing, but I didn't want to completely stop. And it's really hard, Dave, being on the tours, it's funner than shit. It's like so awesome to go to these places and, you end up with, there wouldn't be a pro surfer today who wouldn't say, I've got friends all over the world. I don't just have friends where I live, I have friends all over the world. So, you get to travel, you get to surf all these waves, you get to, catch up with friends. And, I really didn't want to get off the bus those years, even though I knew I should get off the tour bus. I didn't really get off the tour bus. And it's really hard to step off the tour bus yourself. A lot of the time you get pushed off the tour bus and you've got no choice. But when you're sort of still on the bus, you haven't been thrown off yet. You don't want to get off.
Yeah. I mean, I bring this up a lot because it just seemed like such a succinct way to put it. But your neighbor, current CT surfer Ryan Callanan, was on the podcast not too long ago. Maybe it feels like forever ago. But he was talking about having to manage, his knee injuries And he was saying, surfing, it's so hard to say no to, because we love it so much, and we love catching waves, and we love the culture, and we love traveling and all these things. He goes, so it becomes very, very hard to say no to another wave or another session or another contest or another whatever, because you just love it so much, And I said, man, I feel like that's such an articulate way to put it, because we see it all the time, and experience it all the time when we do have to step away from the tour or have to see other people step away from the tour.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to step away from, because it's the tour one is so much fun. You're doing what you love to do, which is compete, and you're traveling. It's they call it the dream tour, and I guess in a way you're living the dream. It's when for people that don't surf, I guess when you start surfing, and I'm generalising here, like a young guy getting older, he dreams of maybe going to the Mentawais and surfing perfect waves, or he dreams of one day, I wonder if I'd be ever able to go to Hawaii. Would I take off on a wave at Pipeline? I'd love to go to South Africa and surf J Bay. As a pro surfer, you get to do all those things, and you get to do them every year. You go to all these exotic places every year, and it's nearly like you've got the Disneyland A ticket. Everyone's stoked to see you turn up. You get waves. It's people look after you. You have a great time. It's the dream to be able to do it, and you don't want to give up that dream. And I guess the other side of the coin is, the reason that you start surfing is because of the pure, I guess, love and joy of riding a wave, and how great it is to ride a wave. Admittedly, the experience is getting more challenging these days with the crowds in the water. It's not quite as easy as it was to enjoy every session. Sometimes you can come in frustrated, but interesting with pro surfing, that when someone steps off that tour bus, they don't go, that's it, I'm never going surfing again, career's over. You just go, great, I'll just go surfing, and if I fall off 10 waves in a row, or don't do some huge cutback and throw a gigantic mountain of spray, it doesn't really matter anymore. And I think surfing is a very unique sport in that way. I know there's other sports you can continue to do when you stop competing, but you can imagine, like football players, for example, that just came into my mind, like a competitive football player. When he retires, I'm thinking of our rugby league players in Australia who play with no protective gear on. They basically just game as smash or be smashed. And I can't imagine any one of them the day after they retire getting all his mates together and go, let's all go run as hard as we can and smash into each other and drive ourselves into the ground. Like, you wouldn't even dream it. Whereas the day any pro surfer, I would think, and this is what I'm imagining, the day I know it was with me, that you retire, you just go, shit, I had to surf good tomorrow. I want to go surfing.
Yeah. Well, even before you retire, we talk about this all the time. It's the only sport where on your days off, you want to go surfing. You mentioned the football players before, but like on their days off, they're like, I don't want to go get like pummeled into the ground for no reason. I'm going to go relax. But like for surfers, it's cool. I'm not working. I'm going surfing. It's interesting. I have to ask about the surf shop. It was your dad's shop. It was Ray Richards' surf shop, and then I think it became Mark Richards' surf shop. Was this another way, and I'm not even saying it as in a cheeky way, but like, was this another avenue for you to continue to refine and build boards? Similar to, you looked at competitive surfing in the early years as a way to get better at building boards. Was the surf shop similar for you?
It was similar, Dave, but it was a way of life, because I was born into that. As I said before, we lived on top of the shop. I shaped at the back of the shop, and I worked in the shop when I wasn't competing during those early 70s and even the world title years. If I wasn't shaping, I was basically in the shop working and serving, if I wasn't sort of surfing or shaping. So I kind of had, as well as a shaping history, I had a working history in retail, and obviously it was, it kind of was always named after my dad, but it was basically a family business, and I just continued on with the business. But in reality, I pretty much sucked at running a business. There's no other way to say it, because I guess my head and heart wasn't really in trying to run a business, and I'm still pretty hopeless at, anything that comes to running markets of surfboards. I'm hopeless. It's like without my wife, I'd be pretty much lost. And my head is either in the water, or my head is, thinking of shaping or making surfboards. And my wife probably, I don't know, can you say F on this, or is it?
As much as you like.
Well, it's the only way to actually explain, what I'm going to say next is my wife kind of nails it, and she says it to me all the time. And she just says to me, "You don't give a fuck about anything unless it has fins on it, do you?" I just go, "Yeah, guess that's about right."
Well, it's funny, right? So I talked to a few of your surf shop colleagues during the window, and I worked at Rip Curl Surf Center in the late 90s and early 80s, and I really watched the dynamic of that surf shop go from 70-80% hard goods, surfboards and wetsuits, 20% soft goods clothing, to the inverse, like in a few years' time, and it went sort of 80% clothing and 20% boards. But I heard stories from Mick Adams and Ben Frawley's that you were you terrorized the poor brand reps because they would come in with their big 200-page glossy catalogs, and you'd be like, get like one of those and that's it, sort of thing. And they were trying to get you to carry more clothing product, and you're like, we're going to carry surfboards and skateboards, thanks very much.
I don't know if I terrorize them, but I obviously didn't order as much as they would have liked. And we were a very old-fashioned, the shop doesn't exist anymore. We closed it quite a few years ago, but we were a very old-fashioned shop, Dave. It was hard goods. It was, there were surfboards, bodyboards, leg ropes, wetsuits, wax, ding repair kits, board shorts, all the essential stuff you needed to go surfing. And we used to, try and carry a few T-shirts or sweatshirts or just the basic stuff. So whenever the clothing reps would come round, I'd basically just go, "We'll have a couple of packs of that T-shirt and a couple of packs of that shirt," kind of. But we were also in an area of town that wasn't, we didn't get a lot of passing trade, so it wasn't, it wasn't really conducive to having a store with a lot of clothing in. And there were a lot of other surf shops in Newcastle at the time. There were 2 or 3 surf shop chains that really sort of specialised in clothing. So our specialty was surfboards, and carrying a huge range of surfboards, and it was what I knew, and it was what I was kind of good at. So that was that was how the shop had always been, and that was how it sort of stayed. I guess we didn't move with the times. That was one of the problems. We didn't move with the times, with that changing thing where surf shops grew from just surf shops only to having clothing and various things in them.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, sometimes I see it in surfing, and it's like, I don't know if anyone moves with the times, and sometimes if you don't, the times cycle back to you anyway, so you're right there. And with the board building part of the business, even though the shops closed down, like, that still continues. Yeah,
it continues. It's in a way, I miss the shop because it was such a huge part of my life, and actually growing up on top of it. And in some ways, because it was my dad's business, and then I sort of took over, I probably feel guilty sometimes that it's not still there, that I didn't kind of continue the legacy. But I guess at some point, for a legacy of a shop to continue, then it obviously needs, your sons or your daughters need to be involved in wanting to continue. And, my kids have kind of gone off in sort of different directions. And, my heart had always sort of been in shaping. So an opportunity came to sort of close it with Paul Green from Slime's Board Store on the Central Coast quite a few years ago. Paul wanted to open a store in Newcastle, and Mick Adam, who I'd worked with for ages, Mick was, the manager. He offered Mick a job, and, Paul offered to carry my boards. And I thought, maybe this is a nice way to sort of end it. There's a way of, even though it's owned by someone else and, with a different name, it's a way of continuing the shop in Newcastle that, has a huge range of my boards in it. gives me a little more freedom in terms of being able to shape more and actually concentrate more on, shaping and designing and being creative without having to, deal with the shop as well. So it, worked out. It's worked out really well. And, I was, even though I miss it, creatively and from a shaping point of view and from a personal point of view, I'm, really happy with the way things are now.
Yeah, and everyone can check out your shapes at markrichardssurfboards.com. I personally, there's no free ads, but I have paid full retail for 2 Bush Ranger models, and they go insane. So no, that's definitely worth your time. We did put out a feeler to the Instagram community, Mark, for a few questions, and we got a shit ton back, but we've whittled them down to 3. So These are coming from the Instagram community. First question is Tiago APSA asks, twin or 2+1? I think he's referring to fin setups. Which do you prefer, the classic twin fin or the 2 plus the little trailer?
I like them both, and I do ride both, and I also ride thrusters. Usually if the surf is really good, I ride a thruster, one of my bush rangers, which you just mentioned. And if the
I should get a discount on the next one.
I know. Just put your order in. When it comes to twinnies, when the surf's really small, I prefer a pure twin. If the surf's, a little bigger than small, like medium-sized surf, 3 to 4 feet, I really like 2+1. And I think having that little stabilizer fin in the tail, it just gives you a feeling somewhere halfway between a twin fin and a thruster, like a little more control than a twin fin, or a little tighter than a twin fin, but a little looser than a thruster. And obviously, at my age now, I'm in the early 60s, my reaction times and my surfing ability is nothing like it was when I'm younger. So sometimes that little fin in the tail just feels a little bit more forgiving sometimes. But we're also in an era of board design where pretty much anything goes as well. There's people riding, finless boards, there's people on mals, quads, fishers, high-performance surfboards. It's just anything sort of goes. And I think with surfing is it doesn't matter what you ride, it's just whatever you enjoy riding. It wouldn't matter if it had 6 fins on it if you enjoyed riding it. It's just what you personally enjoy riding yourself.
Ben Heinrich asks, which surfers were as influential or more influential than yourself, but whose names aren't as prominent as yours in today's surfing world? I guess who are some of the underground heroes when you were sort of in your prime?
So that's a really deep question. That's one I think I would actually need to think about. I think that everyone who is influential, had moments in the spotlight and has been acknowledged and is recognised and is sort of known. It's I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I think that you would get a lot of different answers from whoever you actually answered, because they were people that would be influential in, a certain person's career, or, whether it was shaping or surfing or sort of in their life. So someone who'd be maybe really well known to one surfer and one group of people may not be well known to the others. But I don't know. I guess, the crew, and they're really well known as the crew that really, pushed me competitively were the Aussies and the South Africans, that I sort of competed with through the 70s and the 80s, and and then the Hawaiian surfers sort of in the 80s. It was, a lot of them didn't achieve the competitive success that some surfers had, but they surfed incredibly, and they pushed all of us to actually achieve the competitive success. Like, you don't excel or achieve competitive success without the other people on the tour as well. And I guess an example of that is, like you could say, like for upcoming events, it would be hard to go past, like, Gabby or Italo or John as, possibly the favourites going into an event. But they don't win it on their own to get there. They've got to beat, all these other surfers. So even though there's other surfers on the tour and may not be quite as famous as those three, those other surfers on the tour are responsible for bringing out the best in, those three guys who have all won world titles.
That makes sense. And it actually segues into the third question from the Grumpy Surfer podcast. I guess we're spruiking the competition at the moment. Oh. It's a Grumpy Surfer. It might just be my producer. Do you feel that surfing style is losing its originality with the explosion of surf coaches?
No, you could argue yes and no with that. I've always thought that, initially my style was not very popular. A lot of stuff was written about my style being, knock-kneed or me holding my arms out too wide. And I never concentrated on any particular style. There were people that I loved to watch surf when I was growing up. But what I tried to do was if I saw someone do a really good maneuver, I would try and take influence from maneuver and try and reproduce the maneuver, but not using someone else's body mechanics. I'd just do it in my way, because the thing with surfing is I think it's just an extension of who you are as a person and your mannerisms and everything, because, style is just an extension of who you are. Like everyone is their personality is different. They're a different size. They're a different shape. They walk and talk differently. And I think your style as a person comes out in your surfing. You sort of get people that are a bit aggressive, and their surfing is sort of aggressive. You get a guy like Rob Machado who's super mellow and chilled, and that's the way he surfs. He surfs radically, but it's in a mellow and sort of chilled way. So I think people's surfing comes out in their style comes out in their personality, and it's very hard. I guess it's one of the dangers of surf coaches, that is, if someone, especially with young surfers, if someone is doing really well on the tour, I think the worst thing you could do if you were coaching a young surfer is to go, see that guy, that's the world champ. That's how he does a cutback. We've got to do a cutback exactly the same as the world champ. Like I would be thinking that you would be going, see that cutback? That's a move that is going to score big in a contest. You need to do that cutback, but incorporate it into your body mechanics and the way your style would actually do that cutback. So I think that's the important thing that I think coaches have been great for surfers. I know that most of the time I had no idea what I was doing. My dad was really helpful, but he didn't travel with me. He helped when I was at home, but I was pretty much on my own a lot of the time. And I remember, I think the only coaching I got, there were two people that helped me. There was Mike Ginsberg in South Africa in 80 and 81. Mike was a great surfer and Michael Thompson's sort of closest friend. And, I went to Mike for advice, especially surfing in Durban, the Bay of Plenty, and Mike helped me a lot in those events. And, it's going to sound weird because he was a competitor, but PT actually helped me, I think, in 82, the final year in the world title run. I just felt like I wasn't surfing well, and, things were kind of off the rails a bit. And, I just kind of didn't feel right. And I had some really good conversations with Peter about, what I was doing, how I was surfing, where I was going. And, he was going to compete against me, but Peter was actually a great source of help to me in that final year in a way. So, I think, coaches are, they definitely have their place, and I would have loved to have had a coach, just as a sounding board, just someone to go, here's my plan. What do you think of this? Because a lot of the time you would paddle out just going, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Am I on the right track or not? You just want someone else to be going, yeah, I think that's good. Do this, but if that doesn't work, go to plan B.
I love that answer. I love what you said on style too, because it made me think of, I'd heard something really similar actually from another person whose style is universally revered, with Joel Parkinson. And he was commenting on the same thing where he said, don't try to surf exactly like someone else. Like, you got to surf like yourself, but the maneuvers are functional, you know? So just focus on driving off the bottom and off the top as hard as you can, and do it in your own way, and don't worry about how you look, because that, like, the point is it's meant to be functional, you know? And it sounds like you have a really similar approach.
Yeah, like if you were going to pick someone as if you just said which surfer, you know, going back in time, you could go back to the beginning, would you hold up as an example of such a thing as perfect style? Then Joel would be, you know, just first pick in bright lights. And you know, the beautiful thing about Joel surfing, you know, was that it's all kind of just lower body, lower leg power applied to the board to do radical maneuvers. You know, Joel is, you know, everything is critical. He's on edge, you know, he's above the lip, you know, he's on rail, he's on driving, but there's no excess body mechanics. You know, if you watch Joel, there's no, every time he goes off the top of the wave, there's none of this throw your arms and throw the top half of your body. That one doesn't hit in. When I see people doing that, I'm just going, you don't need to try and throw your top torso off your bottom torso to do a turn off the top of the wave. You know, it's all, it comes from your hips, legs, power applied. It's not upper half. You know, the upper half of your body sort of leads. And, you know, 90% of Joel's surfing, his arms are just, you know, here. They don't go up in the air like this to throw himself into a turn. So, you know, young guys, just watch Joel. It's just
well, we've got a final segment. We call it the lightning round. It's 10 questions. You answer as fast as you can.
Oh,
they're quick. These are quick. All right. First question. If you could only have one board setup for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad, bonzer, or finless, which would you choose?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think I'd have to pick twin fin.
Yeah. See, I told you these would be quick. Coffee or tea?
Tea for sure.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito. Actually, enchilada.
Oh, okay. Last book you read?
Chicken enchilada. Vince Klein. I'm in the middle of the Vince Klein Mitch Rapp series. They are the best books I've ever read in my life. I know they made a movie of the first one. I hope they make movies of the rest of them, but they are insane. Mitch Rapp is the greatest secret agent of all time.
That's a good endorsement. Best surf film ever?
Ooh, I think probably Free Ride. Maybe the 5 Summer Stories. Free Ride.
One wave you never have to go back to?
I don't think there's any wave I would not go back to, because that's throwing someone's surf spot under the bus. And everyone loves their surf spots, even if they live somewhere where they think it's the worst wave in the world.
That's another example of why you're universally loved after so many decades.
Oh, imagine, you know, the 5.
Yeah, no, I get it. I can. Like, yeah.
Everyone who lives there going, holy shit, Emma just threw my surf spot. We love our beach.
I'm with you. Every beach counts. All right. If you only get to surf one wave the rest of your life, which is it?
Honolulu Bay.
Best person to share a lineup with?
The guy that I surfed with on the North Coast, I don't know his name, 3 days ago, that paddled inside me, and a bomb came, and I'd been sitting waiting, and he turned around and said, "Do you want to go?" Anyone who does that, because that is very rare these days. People tend to just paddle inside you, and because you could have been waiting for an hour for a wave, and the moment they paddle inside you, they think it's theirs.
That gets us to our next question. Who's the worst person to share the lineup with?
The guy who paddles straight past you after riding 5 waves on the inside when you've been sitting there patiently waiting for a set, paddles straight inside you, turns around and goes.
Last one.
There's lots of them out there.
There are. Okay, last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by...
actually trying to get to my feet a little quicker when I stand up these days. It's one of the things I've noticed about as you get older, that there's a momentary loss in your jump up speed, which makes takeoffs more critical. So it's a thing it's in my head at the moment. I'm just going, I got to figure out how to get to my feet quicker, because it totally sucks when a wave that's not a late takeoff turns into a late takeoff because you're getting up slower than you did when you were a teenager.
I love the answer. MR, thank you so much for coming on the lineup. Are we going to get to see you on the webcast when the CT comes to Newcastle?
Not sure. Does that mean commentating on the event, or does that mean an interview? Because I pretty much suck as a commentator. I did a couple of some guest commentating during the Quicksilver Pro events a few years ago, and it was when they, people used to actually be able to comment on the screen, and you would see all these comments in, and it was pretty soul destroying sitting there watching the comments coming in, because 90% of them was like, "Get MR out of there. He sucks. You think he's commentating golf? He doesn't say anything. Get him out right now."
Well, I can't imagine those people feel the same, and if they do, fuck them. We'll get you on there in the right way. I think MR, this has been one of the best podcasts we've done. I think everyone would love to hear from you on the CT, and everyone should check out the surfboards. MarkRichardsSurfboards.com. You will not be disappointed. MR, thank you so much.
All good. Thanks, Dave.